So, there I was, standing in the grand atrium of the most prestigious educational institution in the known universe, the Galactic Academy of Advanced Species. Me, Crux Vontari, a humble Pixidian from the Outer Rim. Can you believe it? You should have seen my face when the acceptance hologram materialized in my dwelling pod. My 6 eye stalks practically tied themselves into knots. My mother nearly dissolved into her emergency gelatinous state from excitement. The Academy, or the Pinnacle, as we students call it, orbits the neutral zone between the 3 dominant galactic federations. It's basically a massive ring-shaped space station with enough technology to make your neural pathways short-circuit. The central atrium alone is 27 stories high, with gravity modulators that allow different species to comfortably traverse the common areas without, exploding or imploding or whatever unpleasant thing might happen to them in non-native atmospheric conditions. Welcome, final cycle students. Please proceed to orientation in Lecture Hall 9. The automated announcer's voice boomed through the atrium, somehow simultaneously translating into all 473 recognized galactic languages. Show-offs. I adjusted my exo-stabilizer and joined the stream of final cycle students. Final cycle. The most advanced placement. I had worked my 4 appendages to the bone to qualify. As a Pixidian, I'm naturally gifted in multidimensional mathematics and quantum biology, but even for my species, getting accepted to the Pinnacle's final cycle was about as likely as finding a Vornak's poetry recital that doesn't end in ritual cannibalism. Hey, Vontari. Didn't expect to see you here. I swiveled my eye stalks to locate the source of the greeting. Zrexal, a Mantidean I'd competed against in the Sector 7 Science Olympics. Tall, chitinous, with those characteristic mandibles that clicked when he was excited, which was now, apparently. Zrexal, what a surprise. Thought you'd be off revolutionizing wormhole theory by now, I said, extending my primary greeting appendage. Zrexal's mandibles clicked rapidly. Almost did. But then the Pinnacle offered full scholarship. Even threw in a private respiration chamber. How could I refuse? We fell into step together, joining the diverse parade of galactic species heading toward Lecture Hall 9. The hallway accommodated everyone from the 20-foot-tall Magrathians to the microscopic dust collective colonies housed in their hovering containment spheres. Heard this cycle's competition is fierce, Rexel chittered. They've got 2 quantumids, a celestial hive mind, and even he lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, even a void walker. I nearly tripped over my own locomotion tentacles. A void walker. Here? But they rarely leave their dimension. Special dispensation, Zrexal confirmed, antennae twitching with excitement. Supposedly rewrote half of Professor Nakaru's thesis on transdimensional consciousness just for fun. Great. Just what my confidence needed. I'd spent my entire academic career being the smartest entity in the room, and now I was about to be outshone by beings who could probably calculate the decay rate of a quantum particle while simultaneously composing symphonies with their tertiary brains. We filed into Lecture Hall 9, a massive amphitheater with adaptive seating that morphed to accommodate each species' unique physiology. The hall hummed with the sounds of dozens of different biological and mechanical respiratory systems, communication apparatuses, and nervous chatter in countless languages. Dean Frixos floated onto the central platform, literally floated, as the ancient Lumidian had long ago evolved beyond the need for physical locomotion. His light form pulsed in greeting patterns. Students of Cycle 93. The Dean's resonant voice filled the hall without seeming to emanate from any specific point. Welcome to the culmination of your academic journey. You represent the finest minds from across the known galaxies. Your time here will challenge you intellectually, physically, and psychologically. I settled into my adaptive chair, feeling the familiar mix of terror and exhilaration that had accompanied every major step in my academic career. The Dean continued outlining the rigorous curriculum, the groundbreaking research opportunities, and the networking potential with the galaxy's most influential entities. Oh, and one final announcement, Dean Frixos added, his light form shifting to a more formal pattern. This cycle, we are proud to welcome our first human student in over 50 rotations. A murmur rippled through the hall. Humans? Here? At the Pinnacle? Please extend all courtesies to Representative Kendrix, who will be joining us from Terra System. I exchanged glances with Zrexal, whose compound eyes had widened considerably. A human? In final cycle? Now this was going to be interesting. The anticipation in the academy was palpable, well, literally palpable for those of us with sensory tendrils. The human student was scheduled to arrive during our third rotation, and frankly, the collective curiosity was becoming unbearable. Most of us had only encountered humans through historical archives or entertainment streams. "What do you think it'll look like?" Drexel asked as we navigated the quantum physics wing, our bioscanners automatically checking us in for Professor Nextorix's infamous probability matrices and lecture. I corrected, flicking through the student directory on my neural interface. The profile says female designation. Name's Maya Kendrix. Drexel's mandibles clicked dismissively. Whatever. Bipeds all look the same to me. 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head, so inefficient. No redundant organs, no backup sensory apparatus. It's like they're asking to go extinct. "They're surprisingly resilient," offered Quizzix, a gelatinous Morphean who had oozed up beside us. "My progenitor served alongside humans during the Ridiculed conflict. Said they compensate for their physical limitations with remarkable, what was the word? Stubbornness." We turned the corner into Lecture Hall 3 just as the chronometer pulsed the beginning of session. Professor Nextorix, a quantumid with 17 limbs, each independently capable of solving complex equations, was arranging his teaching materials when the doors at the back of the hall slid open. And there she was. I'm not sure what I expected. Something more impressive? The human Maya Kendrix stood approximately 1.7 meters tall, with a bilateral symmetry so perfect it was almost disturbing. Her external covering consisted of some kind of synthetic fabric in Academy regulation colors, and her epidermal layer was a pale pinkish beige. A mass of dark filaments hair, I recall from xenobiology, was restrained at the back of her cranium. The most striking thing about her, though, she looked completely, utterly ordinary. The entire hall fell silent. Even Professor Nextorix paused mid-equation, all 17 of his limbs freezing in place. I swear I could hear the quantum particles vibrating in the air. "Sorry I'm late," the human said, her voice surprisingly clear. Her translation device was top-notch, seamlessly converting her primitive sound waves into the standard galactic frequency. Transit from Sol system took longer than expected. Something about solar flare activity. No one responded. We all just stared. The human Maya shifted her weight from one lower appendage to the other. Is this probability matrices with Professor Nextorix?" Professor Nextorix finally recovered, his central eye blinking rapidly. Yes, you must be the human representative. Please take any available adaptation pod." Maya nodded, a curious up and down motion of her head that many species found confusing, and scanned the room. The only empty pod was, of course, right next to mine, because the universe has a twisted sense of humor. She approached, those inefficient bipedal limbs somehow managing to move with surprising grace. "Mind if I sit here?" she asked, gesturing to the empty pod. "It's unreserved," I responded, trying to sound neutral while simultaneously retracting my sensory tendrils. Humans were known to be sensitive about personal space violations. "Thanks," she said, settling into the pod, which immediately began reconfiguring to accommodate her bizarre physiology. "I'm Maya." "Crux Vantari," I replied, extending my formal greeting appendage but careful not to release any greeting pheromones. Humans apparently found them nauseating. "Nice to meet you, Crux Vantari," she said, grasping my appendage briefly with her 5-digited manipulator. Her grip was firmer than I expected. As Professor Nextorix launched into his lecture, I couldn't help but observe the human from my peripheral visual receptors. For a species that had supposedly achieved spaceflight with combustion technology, combustion for galaxy's sake. She seemed remarkably at ease. Her ocular organs tracked the 17 simultaneous equations with surprising focus, and her primitive carbon-based digits manipulated her data tablet with adequate dexterity. Yet there was something oddly disconcerting about her presence. Not threatening, exactly, but incongruous. Like finding a Stone Age tool in a quantum laboratory. "Impressive stuff, isn't it?" she whispered, catching me mid-observation. "Elementary," I replied, perhaps a bit too quickly. "Nextorix is just reviewing last cycle's material." She smiled, a bearing of dentition that in humans apparently signified amusement rather than aggression. "Right, elementary." By mid-lecture, word had spread throughout the Pinnacle. Students from other sessions were finding excuses to pass by our hall, pressing their various sensory organs against the transparent walls. Maya seemed either oblivious to the attention or determined to ignore it, focusing instead on taking meticulously detailed notes. "Bet she doesn't last a decade," Rexel chittered quietly from the pod on my other side. I glanced at Maya, who appeared completely absorbed in Nextorix's explanation of non-linear probability curves. Something about her calm focus made me wonder if perhaps we were underestimating this curious, fragile-looking creature. To make it interesting, I replied. "I give her at least until mid-cycle evaluations." Zrixal's compound eyes gleamed with amusement. "Uran Vantari. 100 credits says she's gone before the first quantum physics practical." As we sealed our wager with a traditional Mantidean honor click, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Maya Kendrix than her unremarkable exterior suggested. It didn't take long for the novelty of having a human at the Pinnacle to wear off. By the third rotation, the mockery had begun. Subtle at first, a dismissive tendril flick here, a contemptuous mandible click there, but it escalated with alarming speed. "Look, she's doing it again," Rex, a particularly obnoxious Taurillian, hissed during our xenobiological adaptation seminar. His scales rippled with barely contained amusement. Maya had dozed off. Again. In the middle of Professor Kornak's lecture on respiratory efficiency across species, her head had slowly tilted forward, those strange human eyelids closing over her visual organs. "Sleep," Zrexel explained to the confused crystalline exchange student beside him. "Humans shut down for maintenance approximately 1/3 of their orbital cycle. Completely vulnerable. Predators could just chomp." He snapped his mandibles for emphasis, causing several nearby students to vibrate with suppressed laughter. Professor Kornacki, whose species had evolved beyond the need for sleep eons ago, paused mid-sentence, all 7 of his optical appendages swiveling toward Maya. The movement was so sudden that Maya jerked awake, nearly toppling from her adaptation pod. Representative Kendrix Kornak's voice resonated with exaggerated patience. "Perhaps you find the biological necessities of Class 9 species beneath your attention." Maya straightened, her epidermal layer flushing with increased blood flow, a peculiar human stress response. "No, Professor. I apologize. It won't happen again." "Indeed it won't," Kornak agreed. "Since you seem so familiar with the material, perhaps you'd care to explain to your classmates why the Draconians developed quaternary respiratory systems, while anatomically similar species remained with tertiary systems." The lecture hall fell silent. Even I felt a twinge of discomfort. It was a graduate-level question, purposely beyond the scope of today's material. Maya cleared her throat, another bizarre human habit. "The Draconians evolved on Kepler 186f, which experienced radical atmospheric changes during their evolutionary period, while most species would have gone extinct. The Draconians developed a quaternary respiratory system capable of processing both methane and oxygen simultaneously. This adaptation became genetically dominant due to the periodic methane storms that swept their southern continent, where the majority of the population resided." She paused, then added, "They're also the only known species to incorporate specialized bacteria into their bronchial sacs, creating a symbiotic relationship that allows for atmospheric filtration at the cellular level." Professor Kornak's optical appendages contracted slightly the closest his species came to showing surprise. "Adequately stated, Representative Kendrix, though you neglected to mention the role of solar radiation in the bacterial mutation process." Maya nodded. "Of course. The increased ultraviolet penetration due to Kepler 186f's thinning ozone layer accelerated the mutation rate of the Methanobacterium strain, allowing for more rapid adaptation." The professor blinked all 7 eyes simultaneously, a rare sign of approval, before returning to his lecture. Later, in the nutrition chamber, the incident became prime fodder for ridicule. She probably memorized that one fact, hoping to show off. Rex snickered, his forked tongue flicking out to sample his nutrient solution. "Humans and their desperate need for validation. It's pathetic." "Did you notice her trembling?" Zrexel added, mandibles working excitedly. "Their primitive adrenal response causes uncontrollable microspasms when they're stressed, so inefficient." I glanced across the chamber to where Maya sat alone, methodically consuming what appeared to be synthesized protein cubes. The Academy's nutrition systems had clearly struggled to replicate human sustenance. And what about their ridiculous sleep requirement added lunax, a bioluminescent whose entire body pulsed with derisive light patterns? 1/3 of their lifespan wasted in unconsciousness. No wonder they're still barely interstellar. By the time they finish a hyperspace calculation, they need to take a nap. The table erupted in multi-species laughter. Even Grix, the usually reserved void walker, emitted amused dimensional ripples. "Hey Maya," Vrex called out suddenly, his voice pitched to carry across the chamber. "Are you going to hibernate tonight, or will you try to stay conscious long enough to complete Professor Zendar's quantum mechanics assignment?" Maya looked up, her expression unreadable. "I'll manage," she said simply, before returning to her meal. "Oh, she'll manage," Vrex mimicked, his voice raised to a mocking pitch, just like humans manage to achieve space travel with combustion engines, or manage to survive their primitive tribal stage without killing themselves off. It's a miracle they even learned to make fire. Actually, Maya responded, not looking up from her plate, "We're quite good with fire." Something in her tone, a subtle undercurrent of what? Amusement? Warning? Made my skin follicles bristle momentarily. The mockery continued through the practical applications session that afternoon. Maya's reaction time, though impressive for a human, was noticeably slower than the galactic average. Her strength, while adequate for her species, was laughable compared to even the least physically imposing sentience at the Pinnacle. During the gravitational adaptation exercise, she struggled visibly as Professor Kael'Zar gradually increased the chamber's pull to 3 times standard. While the rest of us made minor physiological adjustments, Maya's breathing grew labored, her movements strained. "Pathetic," Vrex whispered, loud enough for half the class to hear. "My pre-sentient ancestors could handle stronger gravitational fields than that." "Enough," Vrex, I hissed, surprising myself. "You're distracting the rest of us." Vrex's head frill expanded in surprise. "Defending the human Vantari? Don't tell me you've developed an interspecies attraction. How delightfully primitive of you." I felt my chromatophores flush with embarrassment. "Don't be absurd. I simply prefer to focus on my own performance rather than obsess over hers." When we finally exited the adaptation chamber, Maya was drenched in what humans call sweat, another disgusting inefficiency of their cooling system. Yet she walked with her spine perfectly straight, betraying no sign of the discomfort she must have felt. As the rotation ended and we filed toward our respective habitation pods, I overheard Zrixal deliver the final insult of the day. "Hey, human," he chittered, deliberately positioning himself in Maya's path. "We've started a betting pool on how long you'll last here. Care to place a wager on yourself? Though I should warn you, the current average is less than 14 rotations." Maya paused, regarding Zrixal with those strangely expressive ocular organs. After a moment that seemed to stretch unnaturally, she smiled that disconcerting bearing of dentition. "Put me down for graduation day," she said calmly. "And I'd like to bet, let's say 1,000 credits. Is that acceptable?" Zrixal's mandibles clicked rapidly in shock. 1,000 credits was an outrageous sum, nearly a full-cycle stipend for most students. "Your loss," he finally managed, attempting to regain his composure. Maya's smile never wavered. "We'll see." The attack came during the 5th rotation's final session. No alarms, no warnings. Just a sudden, violent shuddering that sent ripples through the Pinnacle's artificial gravity field. "Stabilization malfunction," Quizix gurgled, their gelatinous form wobbling precariously. Professor Nextorix froze mid-equation, 17 limbs suspended in air. His central eye widened perceptibly. That was no malfunction. The station's ambient lighting flickered, then shifted to emergency crimson. The AI system's voice, usually so calm and modulated, now carried an unmistakable edge: "Security breach detected. Multiple hostile entities have boarded in sectors 7 through 12. All students proceed to designated safety zones. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not." The announcement cut off abruptly, replaced by an ear-splitting screech of feedback that made several crystalline students crack along their tertiary fault lines. "Nexus preserve us," Zrixal chittered, mandibles clacking frantically. "It's happening. The Void Collective has finally decided to harvest our brains for their neural network." "Don't be ridiculous," I snapped, though my chromatophores were pulsing wildly with stress pigmentation. "The Void Collective signed the Neural Autonomy Treaty 3 cycles ago." Another violent tremor rocked the lecture hall. This time, several adaptation pods detached from their moorings, sending students tumbling across the deck plates. The transparent wall panels overlooking the central atrium splintered, creating a spiderweb of cracks across the previously impenetrable material. Through those cracks, we caught glimpses of chaos in the atrium. Dark figures, bipedal but moving with unnatural speed, were systematically neutralizing the Academy's security drones. Energy weapons discharged, filling the air with the acrid scent of ozone and burned circuitry. Pirates, Professor Nextorix announced grimly, all pretense of academic detachment abandoned, probably after the rare elements in the quantum research lab, or worse, the students themselves. Certain illegal markets pay handsomely for sentient specimens with unique biological adaptations. A collective shudder passed through the class. Involuntary excretions from various species created puddles of multi-hued fluids across the floor. "We need to reach the emergency transporters," the professor continued, moving toward the secondary exit. "If we can." The door exploded inward with such force that fragments embedded themselves in the opposite wall. Through the smoke strode three figures in matte black exo-armor, faces concealed behind reflective visors. Each carried what I recognized with horror as Thalaxian pulse rifles, military-grade weapons outlawed in civilized space for their tendency to liquefy internal organs while leaving external tissue intact. Messy but effective for capturing live specimens. "Nobody move," the lead intruder barked, the translation matrix in their helmet converting the command into all major galactic languages simultaneously. "The famous students of the Pinnacle, I presume. Your brilliant minds will fetch excellent prices in certain specialized markets." Professor Nextorix moved with surprising speed for an academic, three of his limbs reaching for the emergency beacon on his desk. A pulse blast caught him mid-motion, instantly paralyzing all 17 appendages. He collapsed in a tangled heap, consciousness intact, but body unresponsive. "A valiant but futile," the intruder commented, adjusting the settings on their weapon. "Now, who shall we process first? Perhaps the quantumid student? Or maybe the fascinating void walker? So many valuable specimens to choose from." Panic erupted. Zrixol attempted to scurry up the wall, his exoskeleton clicking frantically against the smooth surface. Quizzics dissolved into their defensive puddle state. Grix, the void walker, began phasing into another dimension, but was quickly neutralized by a specialized containment field projected from one of the intruder's wrist devices. Pathetic, sneered the leader. "You're supposed to be the galaxy's brightest minds, yet you scatter like prey animals at the first sign of danger. Make this easy on yourselves. Line up for processing and neural tagging." My gaze darted frantically around the room, cataloging and discarding escape possibilities at quantum speed. The ventilation shafts too small for most species. The transparent wall now too compromised to break through safely. The secondary emergency exit likely guarded by more hostiles. That's when I noticed something odd. Amid the chaos, Maya Kendrix sat perfectly still in her adaptation pod. While other students panicked, she appeared to be counting. Her lips moved silently, eyes half closed, as if performing some strange human ritual. One of the intruders noticed too. "You, human, what are you doing?" Maya opened her eyes slowly, just calculating what the intruder demanded, training their weapon on her. "How many of you there are?" she replied calmly. "How many entry points you've secured?" "The pattern of your movements," she tilted her head slightly. "You're not pirates." The leader stiffened, almost imperceptibly. "Clever human. But cleverness won't save you. Now move with the others for processing." Maya stood, those inefficient bipedal limbs unfolding with surprising grace. "You know," she said, voice conversational, almost friendly, "there's something your intelligence clearly missed during mission planning." "And what's that?" the leader asked, a note of genuine curiosity breaking through their modulated voice. "This cycle, the Pinnacle accepted its first human student in 50 rotations," Maya smiled, that disturbing bearing of dentition now somehow predatory. "Did you ever wonder why?" Before the leader could respond, the entire academy shuddered again, but differently. Not from an attack, but from an internal system activation. The emergency lights pulsed 3 times, then stabilized. Through the cracked transparent wall, we could see the atrium's massive gravity generators reconfiguring, creating localized fields of distortion. Several of the attackers in the atrium suddenly found themselves floating helplessly, while others collapsed to their knees, pinned by forces 10 times standard gravity. The lead intruder swung their weapon toward Maya. "What did you do?" "I told you." "I was calculating," Maya replied, shifting her weight subtly. Calculating exactly how long it would take for the Pinnacle's defense systems to recognize a Category 7 incursion pattern and activate appropriate countermeasures. Standard Galactic Security Protocol, subsection 12.9, paragraph 4. The intruder fired or tried to. Their weapon emitted only a sad electronic whine. Also calculated how long before the station's AI would recognize unauthorized weapons signatures and engage targeted electromagnetic dampening fields, Maya added, almost apologetically. "Should have been about now." The three intruders glanced at their now useless weapons, then at each other. Even through their visors, I could sense their sudden uncertainty. "You have approximately 28 seconds before Academy security drones converge on this location," Maya continued, her voice still eerily calm. "I'd suggest surrendering. The alternatives are messier." The lead intruder recovered first. With a quick gesture to their companions, they abandoned their useless energy weapons and unsheathed vibroblades, nasty close combat weapons that oscillated at frequencies capable of slicing through most known materials in the galaxy. "Clever calculations won't save you from these, human," the leader snarled. Maya sighed. An actual, audible exhalation of apparent disappointment. "They never want to do it the easy way," she said, seemingly to herself. What happened next occurred so rapidly that several of my classmates with slower neural processing missed it entirely. Maya moved. Not the awkward, inefficient movement we'd come to expect from her supposedly inferior human physiology. No, she moved like nothing I'd ever seen before. In a single fluid motion, she vaulted over her adaptation pod, crossed the distance to the nearest intruder, and executed a precise strike to what must have been a vulnerable junction in their exo-armor. The intruder dropped, their nervous system clearly short-circuited. The second attacker lunged, vibroblade humming with lethal intent. Maya sidestepped with millimeter precision, grabbed the attacker's extended arm, and used their own momentum to send them crashing into the lecture hall's central console. Sparks erupted from the impact point, and the attacker lay still, their armor smoking slightly. The leader, apparently reassessing their tactical approach, reached for something on their utility belt. Sentient weaponized combat augment, they hissed, voice tinged with newfound respect and caution. "You're not on any intelligence briefing." Maya's expression remained neutral, almost bored. "There's a lot about me not in your briefings, apparently." Quick as a Taurelian strike snake, the leader hurled a small spherical device toward our huddled group of students. A suppression grenade. My respiratory passages constricted in terror. Those weapons were designed to incapacitate multiple targets simultaneously by targeting neural functions across a wide range of species. No several voices cried out in unison. Maya's hand shot out, intercepting the grenade mid-air. In one continuous motion, she pivoted and hurled it back through the shattered doorway, where it detonated harmlessly in the corridor beyond. The concussive wave sent loose debris scattering, but left us untouched. That, Maya said, her voice dangerously soft, was extremely rude. The leader attacked with desperate intensity, vibroblades slashing in complex patterns designed to overwhelm any defense. Maya evaded each strike with minimal movement, her body positioning shifting by mere centimeters just enough to avoid the lethal edge. "Stand down," she advised, ducking under a particularly vicious swipe. "You're outmatched, outnumbered, and the Academy's security protocols are now fully engaged." As if to emphasize her point, the floor beneath us vibrated as security bulkheads slammed into place throughout the station. Through the cracked wall panels, we could see Academy defense drones converging on the trapped attackers in the atrium. "The hegemony will not accept defeat," the leader spat, pressing their attack with renewed vigor. Maya's demeanor changed subtly. "The hegemony? So that's who sent you?" Something dangerous flickered across her features. "That explains a few things." She stopped evading. Instead, she stepped directly into the leader's attack pattern, moving inside their guard with a speed that seemed to defy the limits of organic musculature. Her right hand snapped up, catching the descending vibroblade between her thumb and forefinger, stopping it cold. Gasps echoed throughout the lecture hall. That should have been impossible. Vibro blades could cut through starship hull material. "My turn," Maya said quietly. What followed was both beautiful and terrifying. Maya neutralized the leader with a sequence of strikes so precisely targeted that the intruder's armor designed to withstand military-grade weapons offered no protection whatsoever. Within seconds, the final attacker lay immobilized on the floor, armor systems completely disabled. Maya straightened, brushing an errant strand of hair from her face, such a casual, ordinary gesture after the extraordinary display we just witnessed. For a moment, the lecture hall remained frozen in stunned silence. Then Drexel chittered nervously from his position clinging to the ceiling. "What are you?" Maya glanced up, her expression softening slightly. "Right now?" "I'm the reason you're all still neurologically intact," she turned, checking Professor Nextorix, who was beginning to regain motor function in his limbs. "Professor, the paralysis should wear off completely within 10 minutes. "You knew precisely where to strike them," Quizzix gurgled, their gelatinous forms slowly reconstituting. Each blow targeted specific neural clusters or armor weak points across 3 different combat exosuit designs. Maya shrugged that peculiar human gesture of casual dismissal. "Basic tactical training." "Basic," Vrex exclaimed, his scales still pale with shock. "That was master-level combat proficiency. No human possesses such capabilities." "Some do," Maya replied simply. Before anyone could respond, the lecture hall's emergency system crackled to life. All students remain in secured locations. Security breach contained. Medical and technical teams en route to affected sectors. I found my voice at last. "You called it before they even attacked. You identified the exact security protocol and calculated precisely how long the countermeasures would take. How?" Maya met my gaze, and for the first time since her arrival, I saw something change in those human eyes. The careful mask of ordinariness slipped, revealing something ancient and dangerous beneath. "Because," she said quietly, "I helped write those protocols 53 years ago." The implication stunned us all into silence. Humans rarely lived beyond 120 rotations. For her to have authored security protocols 53 years earlier. "That's impossible," Vrex whispered. "You'd have to be 76," Maya supplied. 76 standard years old, to be precise. Grix, the Void Walker, who had rematerialized once the containment field deactivated, drifted forward. "You bear no signs of age degradation common to human physiology." Maya's lips quirked upward slightly. "Good observation." A series of precisely timed explosions echoed from distant sections of the Pinnacle, followed by the distinctive sound of Academy security drones engaging hostiles. More of them, Maya noted, head tilted as if listening to something beyond our perceptual range. Currently being neutralized in sectors 3, 8, and 11, she turned toward the doorway. "We should move. This area isn't structurally sound anymore." As we gathered ourselves to evacuate, I couldn't tear my gaze from this human who had suddenly transformed from an object of ridicule to something formidable. The way she moved, now efficient, precise, alert, made her previous awkwardness seem like an elaborate act. "Maya," I ventured as we prepared to exit, "what are you really?" She paused, those strange human eyes meeting mine directly. For a heartbeat, I glimpsed something behind them: countless battles, decisions carrying the weight of worlds, strategies spanning decades. "Just a student," she answered, her voice laced with irony. "At least for now." Following Maya's lead, we evacuated to a secondary security bunker 3 levels below our lecture hall. Academy emergency protocols had transformed the normally spacious recreation area into a fortified shelter, complete with medical stations and defensive countermeasures. Dean Frixos's light form pulsed with relief when our group arrived intact. "Professor Nextorix, students, thank the cosmic confluence you're safe." His luminous tendrils swept over us, performing rapid bioscans. "Any injuries to report?" "Nothing critical," Dean Professor Nextorix replied, most of his limbs now functioning normally, thanks to unexpected intervention. All eyes, optical sensors, and sensory apparatuses turned toward Maya, who stood slightly apart, scanning the room with the practiced efficiency of a security professional. The Dean's light patterns shifted to a frequency I'd never observed before, something between recognition and reverence. "General Kendrix," he said softly, "so it is you." "General?" A ripple of confusion spread through the assembled students. Zrexal's mandibles clicked rapidly in disbelief. Vrex's scales flushed with embarrassment. Quizzix's gelatinous form vibrated at a frequency that indicated extreme emotional disturbance. Maya, or General Kendrix, apparently gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to the dean. Security situation. Contained Dean Frixos replied, his formal academic demeanor replaced by something like military deference. 17 intruders neutralized. 3 escaped vessels being tracked by Galactic Alliance patrols. Minimal casualties, no fatalities. The hegemony is getting desperate, Maya observed, her casual student persona completely gone. Now she spoke with the unmistakable authority of a commanding officer. This attack pattern suggests they've accelerated their timeline. Wait just one cosmic minute, Vrex burst out, his confusion overriding his usual arrogance. Will someone please explain what's happening? Who is she? The dean's light form pulsed once, then stabilized. Perhaps it's time, General. Maya considered this, then nodded. They've earned the truth. Dean Frixos turned to address us, his luminous form expanding to command attention. Students, you have the extraordinary honor of studying alongside General Maya Kendrix, commander of the Allied Species Defense Force, architect of the Rigellian Accord, and hero of the Battle of Antares Nebula. A collective gasp rippled through the shelter. Even I, with my extensive historical knowledge, felt my primary heart stutter in shock. The Phantom General Zrexal chittered in disbelief. The human commander who outmaneuvered the entire hegemony fleet with just 7 vessels. That's impossible. The Battle of Antares was 42 years ago. 43 years, 2 months, 17 days, Maya corrected mildly. Professor Nextorix's central eye widened dramatically. The enhanced human program, he whispered. It wasn't just theoretical. Maya's lips curved in a slight smile. Hardly theoretical, Professor. I'm standing right here. Enhanced human, I asked, my academic curiosity overriding my shock. A classified project from the early days of the Galactic Alliance, the Dean explained. Selected human operatives underwent extensive genetic and cybernetic enhancements, extending their lifespans and capabilities beyond normal human limitations. We prefer augmented, Maya noted dryly. Vrex, his earlier mockery forgotten, stared at Maya with newfound respect and terror. But why are you here? At an academic institution? Because Student Vrex, Maya replied, the hegemony has spent the last 4 decades developing countermeasures to Alliance military strategy. They've studied every tactic, every maneuver in our playbook. We need new approaches, innovative thinking. She gestured around at all of us. We need you. The brightest minds from across the galaxy, unbound by conventional military doctrine. Your recruiting, Quizzix burbled in surprise. Observing, Maya corrected. Identifying potential. The hegemony's attack today confirms our intelligence. They're planning something big. And they're worried enough about the next generation of Alliance strategists to attempt eliminating you before you graduate. Grix, the Voidwalker, drifted closer, dimensional ripples betraying intense curiosity. You concealed your true nature, allowed yourself to be mocked, underestimated. Maya shrugged, that deceptively casual human gesture now carrying new meaning. Best way to observe people is when they think you're beneath their notice. You'd be surprised what I learned about each of your problem-solving approaches, your ethical frameworks, your responses to stress. I felt my chromatophores flush with embarrassment, remembering every dismissive comment, every condescending explanation I'd offered this legendary military commander. So all of it, the sleeping in class, the physical limitations, it was an act, Zrexal asked. Not entirely, Maya admitted. I do require sleep, though less than unmodified humans. And certain physical limitations were exaggerated for effect. Dean Frixos's light form pulsed urgently. General, incoming transmission from Alliance Command. Priority Alpha. Maya nodded, suddenly all business again. Students, you've performed admirably under extraordinary circumstances. The decisions you made today, the courage you showed, it's precisely why the Pinnacle exists. Her eyes, those deceptively ordinary human eyes, swept across our gathered forms. And why the future of galactic security may very well rest in your appendages. 2 rotations after the attack, the Pinnacle had largely returned to normal operations. Physically, at least. Mentally, Everything had changed. I found myself in the quantum physics lab, half-heartedly attempting to complete Professor Nextorix's latest assignment. My concentration kept drifting back to the events of that day and to the revelation that had shaken our collective understanding. Still processing it, Drexel asked, sliding into the adaptation pod beside mine. His usual chittering arrogance had been replaced by something more subdued. "Aren't we all?" I replied, my chromatophores pulsing with complex emotions. Across the lab, Vrex sat uncharacteristically quiet, his scales a muted shade of contemplation. Quizix had barely returned to solid form in the past rotation, their gelatinous state reflecting intense emotional processing. "She's leaving tomorrow," Drexel said quietly, returning to Alliance command. Apparently, the hegemony's movements require her attention. I nodded, not trusting my vocal apparatus to maintain proper modulation. The rumors had been circulating throughout the Pinnacle. General Kendrix, recalled to active duty following the attack. Most students had been avoiding her out of embarrassment. How do you face someone you've mocked and belittled after discovering they're a living legend? "You know what really gets me?" Vrex joined our conversation, slithering closer. "She never once corrected us. All those times we explained basic concepts to her, concepts she probably helped pioneer, she just listened." Classic intelligence gathering technique, Grix observed, their void form materializing partially nearby. "You learn more when others underestimate you." We lapsed into uncomfortable silence, each wrestling with our own humiliation and regret. "Quite the study group," a familiar voice observed from the doorway. Maya. General Kendrix stood there, looking exactly as she had on her first day. Same unremarkable academy uniform, same restrained hairstyle. Yet now, knowing what lay beneath that carefully constructed ordinariness, I wondered how we had ever perceived her as anything less than extraordinary. "General," we acknowledged in unison, various appendages, tentacles, and energy forms shifting in respect. "Please, it's still Maya," she said, entering the lab. "At least until I leave tomorrow." "We wanted to apologize," Drexel began, mandibles clicking nervously. Maya waved away the apology. "Unnecessary. You behaved exactly as expected when confronted with something that didn't fit your preconceptions." A small smile played across her features. "It's a common failing across all sentient species, humans included." "But we were cruel," I found myself saying. "We mocked your biology, your capabilities, your entire species. And in doing so, revealed your own limitations," Maya replied without rancor. "The greatest minds are those that recognize when they've been wrong and learn from it." She surveyed our small group with those deceptively ordinary eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of galactic powers. "That's why I recommended all of you for the Advanced Strategic Operations Program at Alliance headquarters, should you choose to accept." A stunned silence fell over us. "But why?" Vrex finally asked. "After how we treated you." Maya's expression softened slightly. "Because despite your prejudice, when crisis came, you showed courage, adaptability, ethical judgment. These qualities matter more than your initial assumptions about a species you barely understood." As she turned to leave, she paused. "Oh, and Drexel, you owe me 1,000 credits. I believe our wager was that I'd last until graduation day." Her eyes twinkled with mischief. "Technically, I'm graduating early due to extenuating circumstances." Watching her walk away, this human who had endured our mockery while quietly evaluating our potential, I felt a profound shift in my understanding of strength. True power, I realized, wasn't about biological advantages or technological superiority. Sometimes it was about patience, about letting others underestimate you, about seeing value where others saw only difference. The most formidable organism in the galaxy had been sitting beside us all along, and we'd been too blinded by our preconceptions to notice.